The stars were quiet that night. Captain Cole sat alone in the cockpit of his ship, the Wanderer, watching the endless darkness of space stretch out before him. He was tired. His bones ached from years of traveling between worlds. His hair had turned gray at the temples, and his face showed the lines of a man who had seen too much. But his eyes were still sharp. They were the eyes of a soldier, even though he had not been one for many years. The Wanderer was not a warship. It was a simple cargo vessel, built for moving supplies between human colonies. Had bought it 15 years ago when he left the military. He wanted peace. He wanted to forget the battles he had fought and the friends he had lost. So he became a trader, moving medicine and food to distant human settlements that needed them. Tonight, he was carrying medical supplies to a small colony on the edge of human space. The colony was called New Haven, and it was home to about 10,000 people. They were farmers and miners, simple folk who had left Earth to build a new life among the stars. A sickness had spread through their settlement, and they needed the medicine in his cargo hold. Checked his navigation computer. He was still 3 days away from New Haven. His ship was passing through a region of space called the Neutral Zone. This was an area that belonged to no one. The great empires of the galaxy had agreed to leave it alone. Ships could pass through safely, or so the treaties said. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned back in his chair. The ship hummed softly around him. It was an old vessel but had taken good care of it. Every system worked perfectly. The engines were strong, the shields were reliable, and the sensors were sharp. The Wanderer was not fast or powerful, but it was dependable, just like himself. His thoughts drifted to Earth. It had been 2 years since he had visited the home world. His daughter lived there with her family. She had 2 children now, a boy and a girl. Had only seen them in video messages. He promised himself that after this delivery, he would take some time off. He would go home and hold his. He would sit in a real garden under a real sun. The sensor alarm broke his thoughts. A soft beeping sound filled the cockpit. Sat up straight and looked at the screen. Something was approaching his ship. No, not something. Many things. The sensors showed hundreds of contacts appearing from behind a nearby planet. They were ships, and they were heading directly toward him. Felt his heart begin to beat faster. He studied the sensor data carefully. The ships were large, much larger than the Wanderer. Their energy signatures were powerful and hostile. He recognized the design from his military days. These were warships of the Empire. They were one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. They had ruled their corner of space for 10,000 years. Their empire spread across 1,000 worlds, and their military was feared by all who knew of it. They were tall beings with blue skin and 4 arms. They believed themselves to be the greatest species in existence. To them, all other races were inferior. Humans had only been in space for 300 years. Compared to they were children. When humans first made contact with the galactic community, many races looked down on them. They were the worst. They saw humans as weak, primitive creatures who had no place among the stars. Counted the ships on his sensor screen. There were 500 of them, 500 warships, each one capable of destroying a small moon, and they were all heading toward his single cargo vessel. He opened a communication channel. Perhaps this was a mistake. Perhaps they would listen to reason. "This is Captain Cole of the human cargo ship the Wanderer," he said. "I am traveling through the neutral zone on a peaceful mission. I am carrying medical supplies to a human colony. I mean no harm to anyone." For a long moment there was only silence. Then a face appeared on his communication screen. It was his blue skin shimmering in the light of his bridge. He had the 4 stars of an admiral on his uniform. His name, would later learn, was Orr, and he was one of the most decorated commanders in the fleet. "Human," the admiral said. His voice was cold and filled with contempt. "You have entered space that the Empire claims as its own. Your presence here is an insult to our people." Frowned. "This is the neutral zone. The treaties clearly state that all ships may pass through freely." Admiral Orr laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Treaties. The do not recognize treaties with inferior species. Your kind has grown too bold. You spread across the galaxy like a disease. Today we will send a message to your people. A message? Asked. He already knew what was coming, but he had to ask. We will destroy your ship, the Admiral said simply. We will broadcast the recording to every world in the galaxy. Let all species see what happens to humans who dare to venture beyond their place. Let your people understand that they are nothing compared to the might of the. Felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. You would attack a single cargo ship with 500 warships. Where is the honor in that? Where is the glory? The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Honor, glory, these are concepts for warriors. You are not a warrior, human, you are prey, and we are the hunters. The communication channel closed, stared at the blank screen for a moment. Then he turned to look at the approaching fleet. 500 ships against one. No one would believe he had a chance. No one would blame him if he simply gave up. But Cole was not the kind of man who gave up. He had served in the human military for 20 years. He had fought in 3 wars. He had commanded a destroyer that held the line against impossible odds. He had watched friends die and kept fighting. He had earned every medal the military could give him before he finally retired. He was old now. His fighting days were supposed to be behind him, but as he watched those ships draw closer, something awakened inside him. It was the fire that had burned in his youth. It was the spirit that made humans dangerous. They called it many things over the centuries: courage, stubbornness, the refusal to accept defeat. Stood up and walked to the back of the cockpit. He opened a storage locker and pulled out an old uniform. It was the uniform he had worn as a captain in the Human Defense Force. He had not touched it in 15 years. Now he put it on, piece by piece. It still fit. He looked at himself in a mirror and saw the soldier he used to be looking back at him. He returned to his chair and began to work. The Wanderer was not a warship, but it was not helpless either. Had made modifications over the years. Old habits died hard, especially for soldiers. He activated systems that they would never expect to find on a cargo vessel. First, he powered up his shields. They were stronger than they appeared. He had installed military-grade generators years ago, just in case. Then he activated his weapons. The Wanderer had 4 hidden gun turrets, each one capable of punching through light armor. They were not powerful enough to destroy a warship, but they could do damage. Next, opened his communication array. He began broadcasting on all human frequencies. He sent a distress signal toward Earth, toward every human ship and colony within range. He included the sensor data showing the 500 ships. He included the recording of his conversation with Admiral Orr. He wanted everyone to see what was happening. He wanted humanity to know. "This is Captain Cole," he said into the microphone. "I am about to be attacked by 500 warships. They have declared that they will destroy me to send a message to humanity. I do not know if anyone will hear this. I do not know if anyone can help. But I want you all to know that I will not go quietly. I am a human and I will fight." He closed the channel and turned back to face the approaching fleet. The first ships were almost in weapons range now. He could see them clearly on his screen, great metal beasts bristling with guns. Each one was 100 times the size of his little cargo vessel. Admiral Orr's voice came through the speaker again. "Human, I am giving you one final chance. Power down your shields and weapons. Surrender your vessel and we will make your death quick. Continue to resist and you will suffer." Smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "Admiral," he said, "I have a message for you and your empire. Humanity does not surrender. We do not kneel. We do not beg for mercy from those who show us none. You want to send a message to my people. Here is my message to you. We do not break." He cut the communication and pushed his ship to full speed. The Wanderer lunged forward, heading directly toward the center of the enemy fleet. It was madness. It was suicide. but it was also exactly what they did not expect. The first shots flew past his ship as he wove between the larger vessels. Was an excellent pilot. He had learned to fly in combat where mistakes meant death. Now he used every trick he knew. He spun and rolled, ducked and dived. His little ship moved like water flowing through rocks. A destroyer tried to block his path, fired his guns, hitting the destroyer's engine section. The shot did not destroy the ship, but it caused enough damage to slow it down. He flew past it before the crew could react. Another ship fired at him. The shot clipped his shields, making them flicker, pushed more power to the defensive systems. He knew he could not survive many hits like that, but he also knew that every second he stayed alive was another second for his message to travel toward Earth. He watched his communication screen. The signal was being broadcast across the galaxy. Every ship, every station, every colony with a receiver was picking it up. They were all watching one old man in a cargo ship stand against an entire armada. On Earth, people gathered around screens in their homes and workplaces. They watched in horror as the situation unfolded. In the great halls of government, leaders stopped their meetings to see what was happening. In the military headquarters, admirals and generals sat in stunned silence. They all saw the same thing. 500 warships hunting a single human vessel. They heard Admiral Orr's words about sending a message. They heard Cole's defiant response. And something began to build in human hearts across the stars. It was an emotion that humanity had known since the first humans stood together against predators in the ancient darkness. It was rage. Back in the neutral zone, continued to fight. He had destroyed 2 small patrol ships and damaged 5 others. His shields were failing, his engines were overheating, but he kept going. He knew he could not win. He had never expected to win, but he could make them pay for every inch of space. A heavy cruiser moved into position above him. Its main guns began to charge, looked up at the massive vessel and knew that this was probably the end. That gun would tear through his shields like paper. There would be no escape. But then something strange happened. The cruiser did not fire. Its guns powered down and it moved aside, was confused for a moment. Then he understood. They wanted to capture this moment. They wanted to record his final destruction in perfect detail. Admiral Orr's flagship moved forward. It was the largest ship in the fleet, a dreadnought that could destroy entire planets. The Admiral wanted to be the one who ended this. He wanted the glory of killing the defiant human. Watched the dreadnought approach. He was out of tricks now. His shields were at 5%. His weapons were overheated. His engines were damaged. He had nothing left except his will to fight. He opened a channel one more time. This message went out to the entire galaxy. "My name is Cole," he said. "I am 62 years old. I have a daughter named Sarah and 2 named Emma and Thomas. I served my people for 20 years and spent 15 more trying to help others. I have lived a good life." He paused and looked at the dreadnought filling his screen. "To my family, I love you. To humanity, remember this day. Remember what they did here. Remember that they sent 500 ships to kill one old man in a cargo vessel. And remember that I made them work for it." The dreadnought's guns began to charge. Continued, his voice growing cold, "you want to send a message. You have no idea what you have done. You have not frightened humanity. You have awakened something. And when it comes for you, remember that you brought this on yourselves." The guns fired. A massive beam of energy shot toward the Wanderer, closed his eyes and thought of Earth, of green fields and blue skies. He thought of his daughter's smile and his laughter. The beam hit his ship. The shields collapsed instantly. The hull began to tear apart. Fire and destruction swept through the vessel. And across the galaxy, billions of humans watched. They saw the explosion. They saw the debris scatter into space. They saw the fleet celebrate their easy victory. Then the image froze, the broadcast ended, and in the silence that followed, humanity began to change. The grief came first, deep and terrible. Then came the anger, hot and pure. And finally, something else emerged from the flames of that destroyed cargo ship. It was a promise. It was a vow. They had wanted to send a message to humanity. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But the message they sent was not the one they intended. They did not teach humanity fear. They taught humanity that the galaxy was dangerous, that ancient empires would destroy innocent people for sport. And humanity decided that if the galaxy was dangerous, then humanity would become more dangerous still. In military bases across human space, orders began to flow. Ships that had been hidden were brought out of storage. Weapons that had been kept secret were prepared for use. The full might of humanity, which had been concealed for centuries, began to stir. They had kicked a hornet's nest. They just did not know it yet. And somewhere in the debris field that had once been the Wanderer, a small escape pod drifted in the darkness. Inside it, badly wounded but still alive, Captain Cole waited for rescue. His ship was gone. His mission had failed. But his fight was not over. The galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about humanity. They were not prey. They were predators who had simply chosen to be peaceful. And when that peace was shattered, when their people were murdered in cold blood, the predators would hunt. They had 500 ships in that armada. By the time humanity was finished, there would not be enough left to fill a single escape pod. The revenge had begun. The news hit Earth like a physical blow. In the great city of New Geneva, where the United Human Federation had its headquarters, the streets fell silent. People stood frozen in front of screens, watching the footage play over and over again. 500 ships against one. An old man's final words. An explosion that lit up the darkness of space. President was in a meeting when her aide rushed in with the news. She was a strong woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen the worst humanity could offer. She had led her people through 3 major crises during her 8 years in office, but nothing had prepared her for this. She watched the footage in her private office. She saw Admiral Orr's face, filled with contempt for humanity. She heard his words about sending a message. She saw Cole stand defiant in his old uniform, refusing to surrender. And when his ship exploded, she felt something break inside her. For a long moment, she simply sat there. Then she reached for her communication device and called an emergency session of the Federal Council. The council chamber filled within the hour. Representatives from every human colony gathered around the great circular table. Admirals and generals lined the walls. Scientists and diplomats took their seats in the observation gallery. Everyone had seen the footage. Everyone wore the same expression of grief and anger. President stood at the center of the chamber. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. 3 hours ago, a fleet of 500 warships attacked and destroyed the cargo vessel known as the Wanderer. The ship was traveling through the neutral zone, carrying medical supplies to the colony of New Haven. Its captain, Cole, was a retired military officer and a civilian trader. He was 62 years old. He had a daughter and 2. She paused and looked around the room. They did not attack because Captain Cole was a threat. They attacked because they wanted to send a message. They wanted to show the galaxy that humanity is weak, that we can be killed without consequence, that our lives mean nothing to the great empires of the stars. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some voices were angry, others were frightened. President raised her hand for silence. For 300 years we have been careful. We have hidden our true strength from the galaxy. We have played the part of the weak newcomers, the primitive species that poses no threat. We did this because we believed that peace was better than war. We believed that if we showed kindness, kindness would be shown to us in return. She shook her head slowly. We were wrong. Admiral James stepped forward. He was the commander of the Human Defense Force, a tall man with a face carved from stone. He had spent his entire life preparing for a moment like this. Now that it had come, He felt no fear, only cold determination. "Madam President," he said, "I have a report from our recovery teams in the neutral zone." "Go ahead, Admiral." "Our ships arrived at the debris field approximately 2 hours after the attack. The fleet had already departed. We found the remains of the Wanderer scattered across several hundred kilometers of space." He paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "We also found an escape pod." The chamber went silent. President stared at the Admiral. "An escape pod," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am. Captain Cole ejected from his ship approximately 3 seconds before the main hull was destroyed. The pod's emergency systems activated and carried him to a safe distance from the explosion. He was badly wounded, but our medical teams have stabilized him. He is currently aboard the cruiser Defiance and is expected to make a full recovery." The chamber erupted in cheers and applause. Some representatives were crying. Others were on their feet, shouting with joy. Cole was alive. The man who had stood alone against 500 ships, the man who had refused to break, had survived. President allowed the celebration to continue for a moment. Then she raised her hand again. "This is wonderful news," she said, "but it does not change what must be done. They attacked our people without provocation. They destroyed a ship carrying medicine to sick children. They laughed as they did it. They broadcast their cruelty to the entire galaxy." She turned to face the main screen, which showed a map of known space. "For 300 years we have hidden who we truly are. Other species think humans are weak because we have chosen not to fight. They think we lack the technology to challenge them. They think we are afraid." Her eyes grew hard. "It is time to show them the truth." Admiral stepped up to the display. With a wave of his hand, he changed the image. Now the screen showed something that only the highest levels of the human government had ever seen. Ships, hundreds of thousands of ships, battleships as large as cities, cruisers armed with weapons that could crack planets, fighters that moved faster than light, carriers that held entire armies, and at the center of it all, 7 massive vessels that dwarfed everything else. These were the Leviathans, the most powerful warships ever built by any species. "This," Admiral said, "is the true human defense force. For 300 years, we have built our strength in secret. We have developed technologies that no other species possesses. We have trained soldiers who are the finest in the galaxy. We have prepared for the day when our hand would be forced." The representatives stared at the screen in amazement. Even those who had known of the secret fleet were shocked by its size. The human defense force was not just powerful, it was overwhelming. "How is this possible?" one representative asked. "Our public military is tiny compared to other species. Where did all of this come from?" Admiral smiled. "Humanity has always been good at hiding things. We built our secret fleet in shipyards hidden inside asteroids and moons. We developed our weapons in laboratories that officially did not exist. Our soldiers trained in facilities that no spy has ever found. We have spent 3 centuries preparing for war while pretending to seek only peace." President nodded. "We hoped we would never need to use this force. We hoped that the galaxy would accept us as equals without violence. But they have made that impossible. They have murdered our people and laughed about it. If we do not respond, every species in the galaxy will think they can do the same." She stood tall, her voice ringing through the chamber. "I am asking the Federal Council to authorize the use of our military against the Empire, not to conquer them, not to destroy them completely, but to make them understand that attacking humanity has consequences, to show the galaxy that we are not prey." The vote was unanimous. Far away from Earth in the medical bay of the cruiser Defiance, Cole woke up. His body hurt everywhere. His ribs were broken, his lungs were damaged, and his left arm was wrapped in regeneration bandages. But he was alive, and that was more than he had expected. A doctor came to check on him. She was young, with bright red hair and a gentle smile. "Captain Cole," she said, How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by 500 warships," replied. His voice was rough, but he managed to smile back. The doctor laughed. "That is because you were. Do you remember what happened?" Nodded slowly. Memories were coming back to him now. The fleet approaching. The admiral's mocking words. The battle, if it could be called that. And at the last moment, his fingers finding the emergency eject button, his body being thrown into the escape pod as his ship exploded around him. "I remember everything," he said. "I remember thinking I was going to die." "You almost did," the doctor said. "The escape pod's life support systems were damaged. You were running out of air when our ships found you. Another few hours and you would not have made it." Lay back against his pillow. "What is happening now? Did my message get through?" The doctor's smile faded. Something more serious took its place. "Your message got through, Captain. The entire galaxy heard it. Everyone saw what they did." She hesitated. "And humanity has responded." She activated a screen next to his bed. It showed news feeds from across human space. Every channel was talking about the same thing: the attack on the Wanderer, Cole's defiant stand, and the announcement that had followed. Watched in silence as President gave her speech. He saw the council vote for war. He saw the images of the secret fleet, ships beyond counting, weapons beyond imagining. He saw humanity preparing for battle. "They are going to war," he whispered, "because of me." "Not because of you," the doctor said gently. "Because of what they did. You just gave them a reason to stop hiding." The screen changed to show Admiral addressing the fleet. Behind him, thousands of ships were forming into battle groups. Soldiers were loading onto transports. Pilots were climbing into fighters. The greatest military force in galactic history was preparing to move. "They wanted to send a message to humanity," Admiral was saying. "They succeeded, but they forgot one important thing. When you send a message, you might get a response. And humanity's response is this: we are coming." Felt tears running down his face. He was not crying from sadness. He was crying because he understood what was happening. For 300 years, humanity had been patient. They had been kind. They had offered friendship to species that looked down on them, and they had been repaid with contempt and violence. Now the patience was over. Now the kindness was set aside. Now humanity was going to show the galaxy what it really meant to provoke the human race. In the Empire, celebrations were still ongoing. Admiral Orr had returned to his home world as a hero. The footage of the attack had been broadcast throughout the Empire. Citizens watched the destruction of the human ship and cheered. Finally, someone had put those arrogant humans in their place. The High Council of the Empire gathered to congratulate themselves. They sat in their ancient chamber, surrounded by the treasures of 10,000 years of conquest. The Supreme Leader, a massive named, raised a glass of ceremonial wine. "Today marks the beginning of a new era," he declared. "Humanity has been shown their place. They will cower in their little corner of the galaxy, afraid to venture out. And in time, when we have finished with other matters, we will conquer their worlds and add them to our empire." The council members cheered. They had no doubt that their plan would succeed. Humanity was weak. Everyone knew that. The ease with which they had destroyed the cargo ship proved it. But as they celebrated, a junior officer rushed into the chamber. His face was pale with fear. He fell to his knees before the Supreme Leader. "My lord," he gasped, "our sensors have detected something impossible." Frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Ships, my lord, human ships. They are crossing the border into our space." "How many ships?" asked. 100, 200, send a fleet to destroy them." The officer shook his head. His hands were trembling. "Not hundreds, my lord. We have counted over 200,000 ships, and more are arriving every moment. They are appearing from nowhere, as if they were hiding in empty space itself." The chamber fell silent. 200,000 ships. It was impossible. The entire military only had 80,000 vessels. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to have a tiny fleet of outdated ships. "That cannot be right," Admiral Orr said. He was still wearing his victory medals from the attack on the Wanderer. "Our intelligence reports say humanity only has 5,000 ships." "Intelligence reports can be wrong," the officer whispered, "especially when the enemy wants them to be." Supreme Leader stood up. His face had gone from blue to a sickly gray. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never experienced before. He felt fear. "Show me," he commanded. The main screen of the council chamber came to life. It showed a view from a sensor station on the border of space. The screen was filled with ships, human ships. They stretched across the stars like an endless swarm, battleships the size of small moons, cruisers with weapons that glowed with terrifying energy. And at the center of the fleet, 7 vessels so large that the sensor station could barely capture their entire image. "What are those?" whispered. "We do not know," the officer replied. "We have never seen anything like them. Our computers cannot even calculate their firepower." On the screen, a communication signal appeared. A human face filled the display. It was Admiral James, commander of the Human Defense Force. His expression was calm, almost peaceful, but his eyes were cold as the void between stars. "Attention, Empire," he said. "I am Admiral of the United Human Federation. Several days ago, your forces attacked and destroyed a civilian cargo ship in neutral space. You murdered an innocent man for no reason other than to show the galaxy that humans are weak." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You were wrong." The screen changed to show the human fleet advancing. Ships beyond counting, weapons beyond imagining. The full might of humanity, hidden for 3 centuries, now revealed at last. "You wanted to send a message," Admiral continued. "Consider this our reply. Your military forces have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally. Your government has 48 hours to meet our terms. If these conditions are not met, we will demonstrate what happens to those who attack humanity." The message ended. The screen returned to showing the approaching fleet. The council chamber was silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. "This cannot be happening," Admiral Orr said. His voice was weak. "It was just one ship, one old man. This response is not proportional." Supreme Leader turned to face him. The fear had been replaced by something else now. It was rage, but also desperation. "You fool," he snarled. "You were supposed to scare them. You were supposed to show them their place. Instead, you have awakened something terrible. You have brought destruction upon us all." On the border of space, the human fleet continued to advance. 200,000 ships, each one crewed by soldiers who had seen the footage of the Wanderer's destruction. Each one commanded by officers who had heard Cole's final words. Each one carrying the weight of humanity's anger. And at the head of the fleet, aboard the lead Leviathan, Admiral stood on his bridge and watched the stars ahead. Somewhere out there, they were realizing their mistake. They were understanding that they had not kicked a weak species. They had kicked a sleeping giant. And the giant was awake now. The giant was coming, and it was very, very angry. The revenge was no longer just beginning. It was here, and the galaxy would never be the same again. On the cruiser Defiance, Cole watched the fleet advance on his hospital bed screen. He felt pride swelling in his chest. He was just one old man who had refused to surrender, but his stand had ignited something greater than himself. It had reminded humanity who they were. It had reminded them that they did not bend. They did not break. They fought. He closed his eyes and smiled. They had wanted to send a message. They had succeeded, but the message was not the one they intended. The message was, never make humanity angry. And now they were about to learn why. The border fortress had stood for 6,000 years. It was the pride of the Empire, a massive space station the size of a small moon, armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. 10,000 soldiers lived within its walls. It had never been conquered. It had never even been seriously threatened. Until now. Commander A stood on the main observation deck, watching the approaching human fleet through the reinforced windows. She was young for a commander, only 300 years old, but she had earned her position through skill and determination. She had never lost a battle. She had never known defeat. Today she suspected that would change. "Report," she said to her second-in-command. "The human fleet has stopped just outside our weapons range," the officer replied. "They are holding position and broadcasting on all frequencies." "Put it on screen." Admiral's face appeared on the main display. Behind him, the bridge of his Leviathan bustled with activity. Officers moved between stations, screens displayed tactical information, and somewhere in the background, a countdown timer was running. "Commander of Station," said, "I am giving you one opportunity to surrender your facility peacefully. Your soldiers will be treated as prisoners of war under the conventions of the Galactic Assembly. No harm will come to them if they lay down their weapons." A felt anger rise in her chest. Surrender. A commander did not surrender. It was against everything she believed, everything she had been taught since childhood. "Human," she replied, opening her own communication channel. "Your threats are meaningless. This station has stood for 6,000 years. It has weapons that can destroy your entire fleet. You have made a grave mistake coming here." Admiral's expression did not change. "I see. You have chosen the difficult path very well." He made a small gesture to someone off-screen. The communication ended. For a moment nothing happened. A watched the human fleet through the window. They had not moved. Their weapons had not powered up. Perhaps the human admiral was bluffing. Perhaps he had realized that attacking was suicide. Then she saw it. One of the Leviathans at the center of the fleet began to glow. Energy gathered around its forward section, building into something that A's mind could not fully comprehend. It was like watching a star being born. The light grew brighter and brighter until it was painful to look at, even through the filtered glass of the observation deck. "All hands," A shouted into her communicator, "prepare for incoming fire. Raise all shields to maximum. Activate the defensive grid." The station systems responded instantly. Shields strong enough to withstand a nuclear bombardment surrounded the fortress. Weapons charged and targeted the human fleet. The defensive grid came online, creating a web of energy that would destroy any missiles or torpedoes. The Leviathan fired. A single beam of light crossed the distance between the fleet and the station in less than a second. It struck the shields with force beyond anything I had ever witnessed. The entire station shook. Warning alarms blared across every deck, and on the observation deck, I watched in horror as the shields began to fail. It should have been impossible. Those shields could withstand anything. They had stopped attacks from entire enemy fleets without a scratch, but this one beam from one ship was burning through them like fire through paper. "Shields at 60%, someone screamed. 40%, 20%, Commander, we have to evacuate." The beam continued for exactly 3 seconds. When it stopped, the shields were gone. The defensive grid had been overloaded. Half of the station's weapons had melted from the energy surge, and on the observation deck, a crack had appeared in the reinforced window. I stared at the human fleet. The Leviathan that had fired was already recharging. Around it, the other ships were moving forward, their weapons powering up. They had not even needed to use their full strength. That single shot had been a demonstration, a warning. "Open a channel to the human fleet," I said. Her voice was quiet now, almost a whisper. Admiral's face appeared on screen. He looked exactly the same as before, calm, patient, waiting. "We surrender," I said. "We surrender unconditionally. Please do not fire again." Nodded. "A wise decision, Commander. Have your soldiers move to the docking bays. Our transports will arrive shortly to take them into custody. You will be treated with respect and dignity. That is more than your people gave to Captain Cole." The channel closed, a turn to look at her officers. They were staring at her with expressions of shock and disbelief. A commander had surrendered. It had never happened before. It was shameful beyond words. But it did not feel shame. She felt something else entirely. She felt relief that her soldiers would live, and she felt a growing certainty that the empire she had served all her life was about to fall. The news of surrender spread across the galaxy within hours. Other species watched in amazement as the footage played on their screens. The mighty fortress, the symbol of imperial power, had fallen without a real fight. One shot from a human ship had been enough to break its defenses. On the other, a species of small amphibian creatures who had been conquered by the centuries ago, the people gathered in the streets to celebrate. They had lived under occupation for 300 years. They had been slaves in their own homes, forced to work in mines and factories for masters who treated them like animals. Now they watched the human fleet advance into space, and they dared to hope. "Perhaps," whispered an old woman to her, "our time of suffering is ending. Perhaps these humans will free us." A warrior species from the outer reaches of the galaxy watched with professional interest. They had fought the many times over the centuries. They had lost every war, forced to pay tribute and bow before the Empire's power. Now they saw something that changed everything they believed. "The humans hid their strength," said the war chief, a massive creature covered in armored scales. "They pretended to be weak while building an unstoppable force. This is not the strategy of fools. This is the strategy of hunters." He turned to his advisors and smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "I think we should watch carefully, and perhaps, when the time is right, we should speak with these humans about becoming allies." The collective, an ancient civilization of plant-like beings who had observed the galaxy for millions of years, gathered in their great council hall to discuss what they had witnessed. They had seen empires rise and fall countless times. They had watched species emerge from nothing and grow to dominate the stars. They thought they had seen everything. They were wrong. "The humans are different," said the eldest, a being so old that it remembered when there were still a young species struggling to leave there. "They do not seek conquest. They do not desire power for its own sake. They were content to be peaceful. They only became warriors because they were forced to." "But they are powerful," another council member observed. "More powerful than we ever suspected. Why would they hide such strength?" "Because they hoped they would never need to use it, because they valued peace over glory, because they are, perhaps, wiser than we gave them credit for." The eldest rustled its leaves thoughtfully. "This is a species worth watching, and perhaps worth befriending." Back in space, the human fleet continued its advance. They did not burn and destroy everything in their path. They did not slaughter civilians or bomb helpless worlds. Instead, they struck only at military targets. They disabled defense stations. They captured warships. They accepted surrenders from commanders who were wise enough to see that resistance was futile. Admiral had given strict orders. This was not a war of extermination. This was a war of justice. Humanity had been wronged and they would make the pay, but they would not become monsters in the process. They would prove that they were better than those who had attacked them. "We are not here to destroy the people," told his fleet commanders in a briefing. "We are here to destroy the military and the government that ordered the attack on the Wanderer. Civilians are not to be harmed. Infrastructure is not to be targeted. When this is over, we want them to remember that we showed them mercy even when they showed us none." The commanders nodded. They understood. Humanity was not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for something more important. They were fighting to establish their place in the galaxy, and they would do it with honor. On the third day of the campaign, the human fleet reached the planet Ev. It was the second largest world in the Empire, home to billions of citizens and hundreds of military installations. The Planetary Defense Force included 10,000 ships, the largest concentration of military power outside the itself. The commanders on Eth had watched the fall of. They had seen how quickly the fortress had surrendered. They had sworn that they would do better. They would show the galaxy that the Empire was not finished. Admiral or commander of the Eth Defense Force stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human fleet approach. He had served in the military for 500 years. He had fought in dozens of wars. He was not afraid of death, and he was not afraid of humans. "All ships," he commanded, "engage the enemy. Show these humans what warriors can do." 10,000 ships surged forward to meet the human fleet. It was the largest single battle in the history of the Empire. Both sides clashed in a storm of energy beams and missile fire. The darkness of space lit up with explosions. For the first few minutes, it seemed like the battle might be close. They fought with desperate courage. They threw themselves at the human lines, willing to die if it meant taking enemies with them. Their weapons found their targets, destroying human cruisers and fighters. But then the Leviathans began to fire. 7 beams of impossible light cut through the formation. Each beam destroyed dozens of ships with a single pass. The Leviathans did not stop firing. They swept their weapons across the battlefield like a farmer harvesting wheat. In minutes, half the fleet was gone. Admiral Or watched his forces crumble around him. Ships that he had commanded for centuries vanished in flashes of light. Officers who had served under him for generations were wiped from existence. And still, the human fire continued, relentless and unstoppable. "All remaining ships," he said, his voice heavy with defeat, "withdraw to the planet's surface. We cannot win this battle in space." The surviving vessels retreated to Eth. They hoped that the planet's surface defenses would give them some protection. They hoped that the humans would not risk bombing a populated world. They were right about one thing. The humans did not bomb the planet. Instead, they did something that they had never expected. Transport ships began descending through Eth's atmosphere. Thousands of them, each carrying soldiers and equipment. The humans were invading. They were going to fight for the planet on the ground. Admiral Or was confused. Why would the humans risk their soldiers in ground combat when they could simply destroy the planet from orbit? It made no sense from a military perspective. But then he understood. The humans were not trying to destroy Eth. They were trying to capture it. They wanted to prove that they could beat the in every form of combat. They wanted to show that human soldiers were as terrifying as human ships. The ground battle for Eth lasted 3 days. It was the first time that soldiers had faced humans in direct combat. It would become legendary. Human soldiers were smaller than, they were physically weaker. They did not have 4 arms or armored skin, but what they lacked in physical gifts, they made up for in other ways. They were fast, faster than any species that had ever fought. They could move through buildings and streets like shadows, appearing from nowhere to strike and then vanishing before the enemy could respond. They were clever. They used tactics that they had never seen. They set traps that caught entire units off guard. They coordinated their attacks with a precision that seemed almost inhuman. And they were relentless. They did not tire. They did not give up. They fought through wounds that would have killed other species. They kept advancing no matter how many of their comrades fell. They fought as if dying meant nothing as long as they achieved their objective. One soldier who survived the battle later described it to his superiors. "They came out of the smoke like ghosts," he said. His voice was shaking and his eyes were wide with remembered fear. "We fired at them and some fell, but others took their place immediately. They never stopped coming. They never retreated. They just kept moving forward over the bodies of their fallen until they reached our positions." He paused and looked down at his hands. "I thought we were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. I thought no species could match thee in combat. I was wrong. The humans are not just soldiers, they are something else, something terrifying. By the end of the third day, Eth had fallen. The planetary government surrendered. The surviving military forces laid down their weapons, and the human flag flew over the capital city, a symbol that the galaxy could not ignore. On Earth, people watched the footage of the ground battle with mixed emotions. Pride that their soldiers had performed so well, grief for those who had fallen, and a growing understanding of what this war meant. They were not just fighting for revenge anymore. They were fighting to establish humanity's place among the stars. They were proving that humans could not be pushed around, could not be murdered without consequence. They were writing a new chapter in galactic history. In his hospital room on the cruiser Defiance, Cole watched the same footage. He was recovering well now. His wounds were healing, and he could walk short distances without help. But he spent most of his time watching the news, following the progress of the war he had accidentally started. He felt many things as he watched: pride in his people, sorrow for the fallen, and sometimes, late at night when the lights were dim, he felt guilt. All of this had happened because of him, because one old man in a cargo ship had refused to surrender. Millions of lives had been changed, thousands had died, an empire was falling. But he also remembered Admiral Orr's face. He remembered the contempt in those eyes, the casual cruelty in that voice. He remembered being hunted by 500 ships for no reason other than being human. And he knew that this war was not his fault. It was the fault of those who had attacked him. It was the fault of those who had looked at humanity and seen weakness instead of restraint. It was the fault of an empire that believed it could murder innocent people without consequences. The consequences had arrived. They wore human uniforms, they carried human weapons, and they would not stop until justice was done. Closed his eyes and thought of his daughter, of the green fields of Earth that he might actually live to see again. The war would end eventually. They would surrender or be defeated, and then humanity would face a new challenge. They would have to show the galaxy that they were not just warriors. They would have to prove that the species which had hidden its strength for 3 centuries had done so for a reason. They would have to build a new peace, one where humanity was respected instead of despised. But that was a problem for another day. For now the fleet advanced. For now the soldiers fought. For now justice was being delivered, one battle at a time. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, they waited. The final battle was coming. The revenge was almost complete. The galaxy held its breath and watched. The Eth Prime had been the center of galactic power for 10,000 years. Its cities stretched across continents. Its orbital platforms blocked out the stars. Its defense systems were the most advanced ever created by any species. None of it would be enough. Supreme Leader stood in his throne room, watching the human fleet approach on the massive screen before him. The fleet had grown during its journey through the Empire. Ships from conquered worlds had been released from service and had joined the human advance. Species that had been enslaved for centuries now flew alongside their liberators. The fleet that surrounded Eth Prime was not just a human force anymore. It was a symbol of every injustice the Empire had committed. It was the accumulated anger of 1,000 wronged peoples, guided by human leadership and armed with human weapons. "How many ships?" asked. His voice was tired. He had not slept in days. "Over 300,000, his admiral replied. "The defense fleet numbers only 40,000. We are outnumbered more than 7 to 1. Closed his eyes. 6 weeks ago, he had celebrated the destruction of a single human cargo ship. He had called it the beginning of a new era. He had toasted to human weakness. Now that weakness had revealed itself as the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. The new era had arrived, but it was not the era he had imagined. "What are our options?" he asked. "We have none, Supreme Leader." The Admiral's voice was flat, defeated. Our fleet cannot win against such numbers. Our ground forces cannot hold against a human invasion. Our allies have abandoned us. They have declared independence. The border worlds have surrendered. We stand alone. Then we will die alone, said. There was no anger in his voice, only acceptance. We do not surrender. But even as he spoke, he knew that his people did not share his determination. All across Eth Prime, citizens were gathering in the streets. They were not preparing to fight. They were demanding peace. They had seen what happened to the other worlds that had resisted. They did not want there to burn. The communication system activated. A human face appeared on the screen. It was not Admiral this time. It was a woman with steel-gray hair and hard eyes. She wore the uniform of a civilian leader, not a military commander. Supreme Leader, she said, I am President of the United Human Federation. I believe we have matters to discuss. Stared at the screen. For a moment, his pride demanded that he refuse to speak with this human, this leader of an inferior species. But his pride had already cost him his empire. Perhaps it was time to set it aside. Speak, he said. President nodded. 6 weeks ago, your admiral destroyed a civilian cargo ship in neutral space. The captain of that ship, Cole, survived. He is recovering well, thank you for asking. Said nothing. We came to your space seeking justice, continued. We could have destroyed everything. We could have burned your worlds and scattered your people across the galaxy. We have the power to do it, but we have chosen not to. Why? Asked. The question escaped before he could stop it. Because we are not like you. His voice was cold. We do not murder civilians for sport. We do not destroy helpless ships to send messages. We fight when we must, but we do not enjoy it. We are better than that. She leaned forward slightly. Here are our terms. You will surrender unconditionally. You will disband your military. You will release all conquered peoples and pay reparations for the suffering you have caused. You will stand trial for the crimes committed against Captain Cole and the other victims of your aggression. And if I refuse, then we will destroy your fleet, invade your world, and impose these terms by force. Many people will die. Your cities will be damaged. Your civilization will be set back centuries. Shrugged. The choice is yours, but I recommend you choose wisely. Looked at the human president. He looked at the fleet surrounding his world. He looked at the citizens in the streets, begging for peace. And finally, he looked at Admiral, or the man whose actions had started all of this. Or stood at the edge of the throne room. He had been stripped of his rank and honors after the disaster became clear. Now he waited, knowing that his fate would be decided in the next few moments. Admiral Orr said slowly, you promised me that destroying that human ship would show humanity their place. You promised me that they would cower in fear. Tell me, Admiral, do they look frightened to you? Orr did not answer. There was nothing he could say. Turned back to the screen. For 10,000 years, they had never surrendered. They had conquered and ruled and dominated. They had believed themselves to be the greatest species in the galaxy. They had been wrong. I accept your terms, said. The Empire surrenders. The words echoed through the throne room. Guards who had served the Empire their entire lives lowered their weapons. Advisors who had counseled conquest now bowed their heads in defeat. An empire that had lasted 10,000 years came to an end with a single sentence. On Eth Prime, the people heard the announcement and wept. Some cried from shame, others cried from relief. The war was over. They would live. Their world would survive. Across the galaxy, other species received the news with celebrations. They danced in their streets. They honored their ancestors for letting them live to see this day. The collective recorded the moment in their eternal archives, nodding that a new age had begun. And on Earth, humanity received the news with quiet satisfaction. They had proven themselves. They had shown the galaxy that they were not prey. They had achieved justice for Cole and all the others who had suffered under cruelty. But there was no wild celebration. Thousands of human soldiers had died in the campaign. Millions of lives had been disrupted. The cost of victory had been high, and humanity knew it. They had won, but they would not forget the price. President addressed her people that evening. She stood in the great hall of the Federal Council, surrounded by representatives from every human colony. Behind her, a screen showed images from the campaign. Battles won, worlds liberated, enemies defeated. Citizens of the Federation, she began, today marks the end of the war. 6 weeks ago, an empire attacked one of our ships without provocation. They murdered an innocent man and laughed about it. They thought we were weak. They thought we would not respond. She paused and looked at the faces around her. They were wrong. We responded with the full might of our hidden strength. We defeated their forces at every turn. We liberated species that had been enslaved for centuries, and today we accepted their unconditional surrender. Applause filled the chamber. Let it continue for a moment before raising her hand. But I did not come here tonight to celebrate victory. I came here to remind us of who we are. For 300 years, we hid our true power. We pretended to be weak. We did this not because we were afraid, but because we believed in peace. We believed that violence should be the last resort, not the first. Her voice grew harder. They forced us to reveal ourselves. They forced us to become warriors when we wanted to be friends. They made us fight a war we did not want. And now that the war is over, we must ask ourselves, what happens next? She stepped away from the podium and walked toward the window. Outside, the lights of New Geneva glittered in the darkness. We could become conquerors. We have the power. We could rule the galaxy with an iron fist, just as they did. We could make every species bow before us. She turned back to face the council. But that is not who we are. We fought this war for justice, not for conquest. We wanted to prove that humanity could not be murdered without consequences. We have proven that. Now we must prove something else. We must prove that we can be merciful in victory. We must prove that we can be fair to those we have defeated. We must prove that we are worthy of the power we have revealed. She returned to the podium. They will face justice for their crimes, but we will not destroy them. We will help them rebuild under new leadership that respects the rights of others. We will work with the species they conquered to create a new order in their region of space. We will be the example of what a great power should be. The council members nodded. They understood. Humanity had won the war. Now they had to win the peace. In the weeks that followed, the terms of the surrender were implemented. The military was disbanded. War criminals, including Admiral Orr, were arrested and sent to stand trial. Supreme Leader resigned and was replaced by a council of representatives from different factions of society. The process was not easy. Many resented the changes forced upon them. They still believed that they were superior to other species. They blamed the humans for their humiliation. But others saw the changes as an opportunity. Younger, who had grown up questioning the Empire's cruelty, welcomed the chance to build something better. They worked with human administrators to create new institutions, new laws, new ways of thinking. The conquered species were freed. They received their back after 300 years of occupation. They wept as human soldiers removed the flags from their cities and helped them raise their own. Other species followed, reclaiming their worlds and their dignity. And through it all, humanity worked to maintain order. They did not rule the former empire directly. Instead, they helped each species establish its own government. They provided resources for rebuilding. They protected the weak from those who would exploit them. It was not perfect. There were tensions and conflicts and setbacks. Some humans wanted to punish the more harshly. Some plotted rebellion. Some freed species turned on each other, fighting over territory and resources. But slowly, a new order began to emerge. The region that had once been ruled by the Empire became something different. It became a collection of independent worlds. united by trade agreements and mutual defense treaties. And at the center of it all stood humanity, not as conquerors but as guarantors of the peace. Other galactic powers watched this development with great interest. The collective sent ambassadors to Earth, seeking to establish formal relations. The war chief visited President personally, offering an alliance between their peoples. "We have watched you carefully," he told her. "We expected you to become tyrants after your victory. We expected you to treat thee as they treated others. Instead, you have shown mercy. You have shown wisdom. This is not what we expected from a species that hid its power for 3 centuries." Smiled. "We hid our power because we never wanted to use it. We built our fleet hoping we would never need it. When they attacked, we had no choice. But now that the fighting is over, we want to go back to being who we truly are." "And who are you truly?" "We are explorers. We are traders. We are artists and scientists and dreamers. We are warriors when we must be, but we prefer to be friends." The war chief was silent for a moment. Then he did something that No had done to a non-recorded history. He bowed. "Then we would be honored to be your friends," he said. "And should anyone threaten that friendship, they will face the wrath of 2 species instead of 1. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Species that had ignored humanity for centuries now sought their friendship. Powers that had looked down on humans now treated them with respect. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of that change. On the cruiser Defiance, Cole finally received clearance to leave the medical bay. He was fully recovered now, though he would carry scars for the rest of his life. The doctors gave him a clean bill of health and wished him well. He walked through the corridors of the ship, acknowledging the salutes of crew members who recognized him. He had become famous during the war. The man who had stood alone against 500 ships, the man whose defiance had sparked a revolution. He did not feel comfortable with the fame, but he accepted it. Admiral was waiting for him on the observation deck. The 2 men stood together, looking out at the stars. "What will you do now, Captain?" asked. "You could have any position in the fleet. You could become an admiral yourself. You are a hero to our people." Shook his head. "I was never really a soldier, Admiral. I mean, I was once, but I left that life behind 15 years ago. I became a trader because I wanted peace. I wanted to help people without having to fight." And now was quiet for a moment. He thought of the Wanderer, destroyed in the darkness of the neutral zone. He thought of the medical supplies that had never reached New Haven. He thought of the 10,000 people who had needed that medicine. "I need a new ship," he said finally. "New Haven still needs those supplies. The colony has been waiting for weeks. I want to finish my delivery." Stared at him. "You want to go back to being a cargo captain after everything that has happened?" "After everything that has happened, it is more important than ever." Turned to face the Admiral. "The war is over, but the work continues. People still need medicine. Colonies still need supplies. Someone has to carry those goods through space, and that is what I do. It is what I have always done." Considered this, then he smiled. "I will arrange for a new ship, the best cargo vessel in the fleet. It will be ready for you within the week." "Thank you, Admiral." Clasped his hand. "No, Captain, thank you. You showed us who we are. You reminded us what we are fighting for. The galaxy is a better place because of you." Nodded, but he did not feel like a hero. He felt like an old man who wanted to go home. He wanted to see his daughter and his. He wanted to walk in a real garden under a real sun. He wanted to put the war behind him and return to the simple life he had chosen. But first, he had a delivery to make. A week later stood on the bridge of his new ship. It was called the Phoenix, and it was everything Admiral had promised. Fast, reliable, armed with hidden weapons just in case, and equipped with the best medical supplies the Federation could provide. He set course for New Haven and engaged the engines. The stars stretched and blurred as the ship jumped to faster-than-light speed. Behind him, The war-torn regions of space fell away. Ahead of him lay the colony that had waited so long for his arrival. Smiled, the galaxy had changed. Humanity had revealed its true strength. Enemies had become allies, and allies had become friends. A new order was being built, piece by piece, day by day. But some things never changed. People still got sick, colonies still needed supplies, and there was still work to be done. Captain Cole of the cargo ship, the Phoenix, was ready to do it. 1 year had passed since the end of the war. The galaxy was still adjusting to the new order, but the worst of the chaos had settled. Trade routes were open again. Diplomatic missions traveled between worlds. And slowly, carefully, the various species of the galaxy were learning to live together in peace. Cole guided the Phoenix through the busy space lanes around the planet. This was a hub world, a place where dozens of species came together to trade and negotiate. A year ago, it had been a quiet outpost on the edge of territory. Now it was one of the most important crossroads in the galaxy. Had been busy during that year. He had made his delivery to New Haven, finally bringing the medical supplies that the colony had needed so desperately. The people had welcomed him as a hero, throwing celebrations in his honor. He had tried to tell them that he was just a cargo captain doing his job, but they would not listen. After New Haven, he had taken on more deliveries. There was no shortage of work. Worlds that had been cut off during the war needed supplies. Colonies that had been neglected by the Empire were rebuilding with human help. Carried medicine, food, equipment, and sometimes just hope from one world to another. He had also visited Earth. He had spent 3 months there, reconnecting with his daughter Sarah and meeting his properly for the first time. Emma was 7 now, a bright girl with curious eyes who wanted to know everything about space. Thomas was 5, a quiet boy who liked to sit on his lap and listen to stories. They were too young to understand the war. They did not know that their grandfather had become famous. They only knew that he was there, that he loved them, and that he always had time for one more story before bed. Those had been good months, but eventually had felt the call of the stars again. He was not made for a quiet retirement on Earth. He needed to be out there, moving between worlds, helping people in his own small way. Sarah had understood. She was her father's daughter after all. "Just promise me you will be careful," she had said when he left. Had smiled, "I am always careful." She had laughed at that. They both knew it was not entirely true, but she had hugged him anyway and watched him walk back to his ship. Now he was approaching with a cargo hold full of agricultural equipment. A colony on the other side of the sector needed it to start their spring planting. It was not exciting work, but it was important work. People needed to eat. His communication system chimed. An incoming message from the station authority. "Cargo vessel Phoenix, this is station. Please transmit your identification and cargo manifest." Sent the required information. A moment later, the station responded. "Welcome to Captain Cole. We have your landing clearance ready. Docking Bay 17. And Captain, the station commander would like to meet with you when you have time." Frowned slightly. Station commanders did not usually ask to meet with cargo captains. Something was going on. "Understood, station. I will contact the commander after I have secured my ship." He guided the Phoenix into the massive docking bay and settled it gently onto the landing pad. The engines powered down with a familiar hum, went through his shutdown checklist automatically, his mind still wondering about the commander's invitation. An hour later, he was sitting in the station commander's office. The commander was a woman named, no relation to Admiral, but with the same kind of sharp intelligence in her eyes. She wore the uniform of the Federation Diplomatic Corps, which told that she was more than just a station commander. "Thank you for coming, Captain Cole," she said. "I apologize for the mystery. I could not explain the situation over an open channel." "What situation?" Leaned back in her chair. You know that the former empire has been restructuring itself. The old government is gone, replaced by a council of representatives from different factions. They have been working with human advisors to build new institutions, new laws, new ways of doing things. Nodded, he had been following the news when he could. The process has not been easy, continued. There are many who still believe in the old ways. They think their species is superior to all others. They blame humanity for their defeat. They want revenge. That is not surprising, said. You cannot change 10,000 years of thinking in 1 year. No, you cannot, but we have been making progress. The younger are more open to change. The freed species have been surprisingly forgiving. We thought we might have decades of work ahead of us, but things have been moving faster than expected. She paused and looked at directly. And then there is you. Me. You are famous, Captain, not just among humans but across the galaxy. You are the man who stood alone against 500 ships. You are the symbol of human defiance, of human courage. When people talk about the war, they talk about you. Shifted uncomfortably. I did not ask for that. I was just trying to survive. I know, but what you want does not change what you are. You have become a symbol, Captain, and symbols have power. Stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of station twinkled in the darkness. The new council has made a request. They want to hold a ceremony marking the 1-year anniversary of the end of the war. They want representatives from all the species affected by the conflict to attend, and they specifically want you to be there. Stared at her. Why me? Because you are where it started. The attack on your ship was the event that triggered everything. The who support reform want to publicly apologize for what happened to you. They want to show the galaxy that they have changed. And what about the who do not support reform, the ones who want revenge? His expression grew serious. That is a risk. There are those who might see you as a target, but we will have security, a lot of security, and the reformist faction believes that this ceremony is essential for the healing process. They think that if you can forgive, others will follow your example. Was quiet for a long time. He thought about the Wanderer burning in the darkness of space. He thought about Admiral Orr's mocking voice. He thought about the fear and pain of those terrible moments before his ship exploded. Could he forgive that? Could he stand before the people who had tried to murder him and offer them peace? He thought about He thought about the kind of galaxy he wanted them to grow up in. He thought about what his own father had taught him, long ago on Earth, about the courage it took to choose peace over hate. When is this ceremony? He asked. Smiled. 1 week, on Eth Prime will you go? Took a deep breath. I will go. The journey to Eth Prime took 3 days. Traveled aboard a diplomatic vessel, surrounded by Federation officials and security personnel. He spent most of the trip alone in his quarters, preparing himself for what was to come. When he arrived, he found a planet transformed. The towering monuments to imperial glory had been taken down. The flags that had once proclaimed superiority now hung in museums, relics of a shameful past. In their place were new symbols, new slogans, new ideas about what the people could become. The ceremony was held in the great plaza at the center of the capital city. Thousands of attended, along with representatives from dozens of other species. Humans stood alongside and former enemies now gathered in the same space, united by a shared desire for peace. Stood on the main stage, looking out at the crowd. He wore his old military uniform, the same one he had put on before his final stand against the Armada. It felt strange to wear it here, in the heart of the empire that had tried to destroy him. The leader of the new council, a young female named In, stepped up to the podium. She was only 200 years old, practically a child by standards, but she had been chosen to represent the future of her people. 1 year ago, she began, our empire committed an act of unspeakable cruelty. We attacked an innocent ship. We tried to murder a man whose only crime was being human. We did this to send a message, to prove that we were powerful and others were weak." Her voice grew heavy with emotion. "We were wrong. We were not strong. We were cowards. True strength does not come from destroying the helpless. True strength comes from building, from creating, from offering friendship instead of fear." She turned to face. "Captain Cole, on behalf of the people, I offer you our deepest apology. We cannot undo what was done to you. We cannot bring back the ship you loved or erase the trauma you suffered. All we can do is promise that it will never happen again. We promise to become better. We promise to honor your courage by changing our ways." She bowed to him, a deep bow that her ancestors would have found unthinkable. The crowd was silent, waiting to see how would respond. Stepped up to the podium. His heart was pounding and his hands were slightly shaky, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "1 year ago, I thought I was going to die. 500 of your ships surrounded my little cargo vessel. Your admiral told me that I was prey, that humanity was nothing compared to the might of the... He fired his weapons and my ship was destroyed." He paused and looked out at the assembled. "I survived. Against all odds I survived. And in the year since then, I have watched your people change. I have seen your young ones reject the hatred of their elders. I have seen your reformers work to build a better society. I have seen signs of hope where I once saw only darkness." His voice softened. "Hatred is easy. Forgiveness is hard. But I have learned something in my 63 years of life. The hard choices are usually the right ones. If I hold on to my anger, if I refuse to forgive, then the who attacked me have won. They have turned me into something bitter and broken." He shook his head. "I will not give them that victory. I choose to forgive. I choose to believe that your people can change. I choose to hope for a future where humans can live together in peace." He extended his hand to In. "Let us build that future together." In took his hand. The crowd erupted in cheers, and humans, and all of them celebrating this moment of reconciliation. But not everyone was celebrating. At the edge of the plaza, a group of in dark clothing watched with hatred in their eyes. They were members of a faction called the True, those who still believed in the old ways. They had not come to celebrate. They had come for revenge. Their leader, a former military officer, named or gave a signal. One of his followers raised a weapon, aiming directly at Cole. But before he could fire, something unexpected happened. A civilian standing next to him noticed the weapon. Without hesitation, she grabbed the attacker's arm and shouted a warning. Security officers converged on the location. The weapon was seized. The attackers were arrested. It was over in seconds. Had not even seen the threat before it was neutralized. In rushed to his side. "Captain, are you all right?" Looked at the woman who had stopped the attack. She was an ordinary citizen, neither young nor old, with no obvious connection to the security forces. She had simply seen something wrong and acted. "I am fine," he said, "thanks to her." He walked over to the woman, who was being interviewed by security officers. She looked nervous but also proud. "Thank you," said simply. "You saved my life." The woman bowed her head. "You forgave us. You showed us that there can be peace between our peoples. How could I do anything less?" Smiled. This was the future he had hoped for. Not a perfect future, not one without conflict or danger, but one where ordinary people chose courage over fear, compassion over hatred. The ceremony continued, though with increased security. Speeches were given, treaties were signed, promises were made. By the time it ended, the galaxy had taken another step toward lasting peace. That evening stood alone on a balcony overlooking the capital. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was beautiful, he realized. Even this world, which had been the heart of an empire that tried to kill him, had its own beauty. President joined him on the balcony. She had attended the ceremony as the official representative of the Federation. "You did well today, Captain," she said. Shrugged, I just said what I felt. That is exactly what made it powerful. You could have held onto your anger. You could have demanded harsher punishment for the... No one would have blamed you. Instead, you offered forgiveness. You showed the galaxy that humanity is not just strong but also wise. She looked out at the sunset. Do you know what the other species are saying about us now? They are saying that humans are different, that we have something special, something that makes us worthy of respect. They are seeking alliances with us. They are asking for our help and guidance. Is that what we want? Asked. To lead the galaxy. Not to lead, to serve, to help where we can and step back when we should, to be the example of what a great power can be. Smiled. That is what you taught us, Captain. When you stood alone against those ships, you showed us who we truly are. We are not conquerors, we are protectors. Considered this. It seemed like a heavy burden for one species to carry. But then again, humanity had always been good at carrying heavy burdens. What happens now? He asked. Now we keep working. The peace is fragile. There are still those who want war on both sides. We have to be vigilant, but I believe we will succeed. I believe in humanity, and after today I believe in the other species too. She clasped his shoulder. Go home, Captain, see your family, rest. You have earned it. Nodded. He was tired, more tired than he had realized. The past year had been exhausting, physically and emotionally. He needed time to recover, time to think, time to figure out what the rest of his life would look like. But he knew one thing for certain. He would not stop being who he was. He would not give up his ship or his work. There were still deliveries to make, colonies to supply, people to help. That was his purpose, his reason for existing. A war had not changed that. Nothing could. He took one last look at the sunset. Then he turned and walked away, ready to begin the next chapter of his life. 2 months later was back in space aboard the Phoenix, carrying a load of construction materials to a colony on the frontier. The stars stretched out before him, endless and beautiful. He was where he belonged. A communication signal came through. It was from Emma, his granddaughter. She had learned how to use the interstellar messaging system and now sent him videos every few days. Hi, Grandpa, her young voice chirped from the speaker. Mom says you are far away again, helping people. I think that is very brave. Thomas and I made you a picture. It has your ship and lots of stars. Mom said she will send it to you. Smiled as he listened. This was what he was fighting for all along. Not glory or revenge or power, just this. A little girl's voice, a picture of a ship and stars, the knowledge that the galaxy was a better place than it had been. They had wanted to send a message to humanity. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, but the message was not the one they intended. The message was, humanity does not break, humanity does not surrender, and when the fighting is over, humanity forgives. That was the most terrifying thing of all. The galaxy had expected humans to become tyrants after their victory. Instead, they had become something far more dangerous. They had become the conscience of the galaxy, the example that others aspired to follow, the species that proved peace was possible even after the worst violence. Set course for his destination and engaged the engines. The Phoenix leaped forward into the endless night. Behind him, the galaxy continued to heal. Wars ended. Alliances formed. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years began to talk instead of fight. And at the center of it all, humanity stood watch, not as rulers or conquerors, but as guardians, waiting, hopping, ready to defend the peace they had helped create. The revenge was complete, but it was not the revenge of destruction. It was the revenge of becoming something better, of proving that kindness was not weakness, of showing the galaxy that the species which hid its power for 3 centuries did so because it believed in something more important than strength. It believed in hope. And hope, as humanity had proven, was the most powerful force in the universe. Captain Cole flew on through the stars, carrying supplies to those who needed them. An ordinary man doing ordinary work. The galaxy stretched out before him, full of possibilities. This was what victory looked like. Not war, not conquest, not revenge. Just an old man in a cargo ship, helping people. Just humanity being human. And that was enough. That was everything.